Chapter 17. After Anna Mikhailovna had driven off with her son to visit Count Cyril Vladimirovich Bezukov, Countess Rostova sat for a long time all alone applying her handkerchief to her eyes. At last she rang. "What is the matter with you, my dear?" she said crossly to the maid who kept her waiting some minutes. "Don't you wish to serve me? Then I'll find you another place." The countess was upset by her friend's sorrow and humiliating poverty, and was therefore out of sorts, a state of mind which with her always found expression in calling her maid "my dear" and speaking to her with exaggerated politeness. "I am very sorry, ma'am," answered the maid. "Ask the count to come to me." The count came waddling in to see his wife with a rather guilty look as usual. "Well, little countess? What a sauté of game au Madeira we are to have, my dear. I tasted it. The 1,000 rubles I paid for Taras were not ill spent. He is worth it." He sat down by his wife, his elbows on his knees and his hands ruffling his grey hair. "What are your commands, little countess?" "You see, my dear." "What's that mess?" she said, pointing to his waistcoat. "It's the sauté, most likely," she added with a smile. "Well, you see, Count, I want some money." Her face became sad. "Oh, little countess," and the count began bustling to get out his pocketbook. "I want a great deal, Count. I want 500 rubles," and taking out her cambric handkerchief she began wiping her husband's waistcoat. "Yes, immediately, immediately." "Hey, who's there?" he called out in a tone only used by persons who are certain that those they call will rush to obey the summons. "Send Dmitri to me." Dmitri, a man of good family who had been brought up in the count's house and now managed all his affairs, stepped softly into the room. "This is what I want, my dear fellow," said the count to the deferential young man who had entered. "Bring me," he reflected a moment, "yes, bring me 700 rubles, yes. But mind, don't bring me such tattered and dirty notes as last time, but nice clean ones for the countess." "Yes, Dmitri, clean ones, please," said the countess, sighing deeply. "When would you like them, your excellency?" asked Dmitri. "Allow me to inform you. But, don't be uneasy," he added, noticing that the count was beginning to breathe heavily and quickly, which was always a sign of approaching anger. "I was forgetting. Do you wish it brought at once?" "Yes, yes, just so." "Bring it. Give it to the countess." "What a treasure that Dmitri is," added the count with a smile when the young man had departed. "There is never any impossible with him. That's a thing I hate. Everything is possible." "Ah, money, Count, money. How much sorrow it causes in the world," said the countess. "But I am in great need of this sum." "You, my little countess, are a notorious spendthrift," said the count, and having kissed his wife's hand he went back to his study. When Anna Mikhailovna returned from Count Bezukov's, the money, all in clean notes, was lying ready under a handkerchief on the countess' little table, and Anna Mikhailovna noticed that something was agitating her. "Well, my dear?" asked the countess. "Oh, what a terrible state he is in. One would not know him, he is so ill. I was only there a few moments and hardly said a word." "Annette, for heaven's sake don't refuse me," the countess began, with a blush that looked very strange on her thin, dignified, elderly face, and she took the money from under the handkerchief. Anna Mikhailovna instantly guessed her intention and stooped to be ready to embrace the countess at the appropriate moment. "This is for Boris from me, for his outfit." Anna Mikhailovna was already embracing her and weeping. The countess wept too. They wept because they were friends, and because they were kind-hearted, and because they, friends from childhood, had to think about such a base thing as money, and because their youth was over. But those tears were pleasant to them both. Chapter 18. Countess Rostova, with her daughters and a large number of guests, was already seated in the drawing-room. The count took the gentlemen into his study and showed them his choice collection of Turkish pipes. From time to time he went out to ask, "Hasn't she come yet?" They were expecting Maria Dmitrievna Akrosimova, known in society as Le Terrible Dragon, a lady distinguished not for wealth or rank, but for common sense and frank plainness of speech. Maria Dmitrievna was known to the imperial family as well as to all Moscow and Petersburg, and both cities wondered at her, laughed privately at her rudenesses, and told good stories about her, while none the less all without exception respected and feared her. In the count's room, which was full of tobacco smoke, they talked of the war that had been announced in a manifesto, and about the recruiting. None of them had yet seen the manifesto, but they all knew it had appeared. The count sat on the sofa between two guests who were smoking and talking. He neither smoked nor talked, but bending his head first to one side and then to the other watched the smokers with evident pleasure and listened to the conversation of his two neighbors, whom he egged on against each other. One of them was a sallow, clean-shaven civilian with a thin and wrinkled face, already growing old, though he was dressed like a most fashionable young man. He sat with his legs up on the sofa as if quite at home and, having stuck an amber mouthpiece far into his mouth, was inhaling the smoke spasmodically and screwing up his eyes. This was an old bachelor, Shinshin, a cousin of the countess, a man with a sharp tongue, as they said in Moscow society. He seemed to be condescending to his companion. The latter, a fresh, rosy officer of the guards, irreproachably washed, brushed, and buttoned, held his pipe in the middle of his mouth and with red lips gently inhaled the smoke, letting it escape from his handsome mouth in rings. This was Lieutenant Berg, an officer in the Semenov regiment with whom Boris was to travel to join the army, and about whom Natasha had teased her elder sister Vera, speaking of Berg as her intended. The count sat between them and listened attentively. His favorite occupation when not playing Boston, a card game he was very fond of, was that of listener, especially when he succeeded in setting two loquacious talkers at one another. "Well, then, old chap, mon très honorable Alphonse Karlovitch," said Shinshin, laughing ironically and mixing the most ordinary Russian expressions with the choicest French phrases, which was a peculiarity of his speech. "Vous comptez vous faire de rente sur l'état, * you want to make something out of your company? * you expect to make an income out of the government? No, Peter Nikolaevich, I only want to show that in the cavalry the advantages are far less than in the infantry. Just consider my own position now, Peter Nikolaevich." Berg always spoke quietly, politely, and with great precision. His conversation always related entirely to himself. He would remain calm and silent when the talk related to any topic that had no direct bearing on himself. He could remain silent for hours without being at all put out of countenance himself or making others uncomfortable, but as soon as the conversation concerned himself he would begin to talk circumstantially and with evident satisfaction. "Consider my position, Peter Nikolaevich. Were I in the cavalry I should get not more than 200 rubles every 4 months, even with the rank of lieutenant, but as it is I receive 230, said he, looking at Shinshin and the count with a joyful, pleasant smile, as if it were obvious to him that his success must always be the chief desire of everyone else. "Besides that, Peter Nikolaevich, by exchanging into the guards I shall be in a more prominent position," continued Berg, "and vacancies occur much more frequently in the foot guards. Then just think what can be done with 230 rubles. I even managed to put a little aside and to send something to my father," he went on, emitting a smoke ring. "La balance y est, * a German knows how to skin a flint, as the proverb says," remarked Shinshin, moving his pipe to the other side of his mouth and winking at the count. * So that squares matters." The count burst out laughing. The other guests seeing that Shinshin was talking came up to listen. Berg, oblivious of irony or indifference, continued to explain how by exchanging into the guards he had already gained a step on his old comrades of the cadet corps, how in wartime the company commander might get killed and he, as senior in the company, might easily succeed to the post, how popular he was with everyone in the regiment, and how satisfied his father was with him. Berg evidently enjoyed narrating all this, and did not seem to suspect that others, too, might have their own interests. But all he said was so prettily sedate, and the naivete of his youthful egotism was so obvious, that he disarmed his hearers. "Well, my boy, you'll get along wherever you go, foot or horse, that I'll warrant," said Shinshin, patting him on the shoulder and taking his feet off the sofa. Berg smiled joyously. The count, followed by his guests, went into the drawing-room. It was just the moment before a big dinner when the assembled guests, expecting the summons to Zakuska, avoid engaging in any long conversation but think it necessary to move about and talk, in order to show that they are not at all impatient for their food. The host and hostess look toward the door, and now and then glance at one another, and the visitors try to guess from these glances who, or what, they are waiting for, some important relation who has not yet arrived, or a dish that is not yet ready. Hors d'oeuvres. Pierre had come just at dinner time and was sitting awkwardly in the middle of the drawing room on the first chair he had come across, blocking the way for everyone. The Countess tried to make him talk, but he went on naively looking around through his spectacles as if in search of somebody and answered all her questions in monosyllables. He was in the way and was the only one who did not notice the fact. Most of the guests, knowing of the affair with the bear, looked with curiosity at this big, stout, quiet man, wondering how such a clumsy, modest fellow could have played such a prank on a policeman. "You have only lately arrived?" the Countess asked him. "Oui, madam," replied he, looking around him. "You have not yet seen my husband?" "Non, madam." He smiled quite inappropriately. "You have been in Paris recently, I believe. I suppose it's very interesting." "Very interesting." The Countess exchanged glances with Anna Mikhailovna. The latter understood that she was being asked to entertain this young man, and sitting down beside him she began to speak about his father, but he answered her, as he had the Countess, only in monosyllables. The other guests were all conversing with one another. The Razumovskys. "It was charming." "You are very kind." "Countess Apraxina," was heard on all sides. The Countess rose and went into the ballroom. "Maria Dmitrievna," came her voice from there. "Herself," came the answer in a rough voice, and Maria Dmitrievna entered the room. All the unmarried ladies and even the married ones except the very oldest rose. Maria Dmitrievna paused at the door. Tall and stout, holding high her 50-year-old head with its grey curls, she stood surveying the guests, and leisurely arranged her wide sleeves as if rolling them up. Maria Dmitrievna always spoke in Russian. "Health and happiness to her whose name day we are keeping and to her children," she said, in her loud, full-toned voice which drowned all others. "Well, you old sinner," she went on, turning to the Count who was kissing her hand, "you're feeling dull in Moscow, I dare say. Nowhere to hunt with your dogs. But what is to be done, old man? Just see how these nestlings are growing up," and she pointed to the girls. "You must look for husbands for them whether you like it or not." "Well," said she, "how's my Cossack?" Maria Dmitrievna always called Natasha a Cossack, and she stroked the child's arm as she came up fearless and gay to kiss her hand. "I know she's a scamp of a girl, but I like her." She took a pair of pear-shaped ruby earrings from her huge reticule and, having given them to the rosy Natasha, who beamed with the pleasure of her Saint's Day fate, turned away at once and addressed herself to Pierre. Friend. Come here a bit," said she, assuming a soft high tone of voice. "Come here, my friend," and she ominously tucked up her sleeves still higher. Pierre approached, looking at her in a childlike way through his spectacles. come nearer, friend. I used to be the only one to tell your father the truth when he was in favor, and in your case it's my evident duty." She paused. All were silent, expectant of what was to follow, for this was clearly only a prelude. "A fine lad. My word. A fine lad. His father lies on his deathbed and he amuses himself setting a policeman astride a bear. For shame, sir, for shame. It would be better if you went to the war." She turned away and gave her hand to the Count, who could hardly keep from laughing. "Well, I suppose it is time we were at table," said Maria Dmitrievna. The Count went in first with Maria Dmitrievna, the Countess followed on the arm of a colonel of hussars, a man of importance to them because Nicholas was to go with him to the regiment, then came Anna Mikhailovna with Shinshin. Berg gave his arm to Vera. The smiling Julie Karagina went in with Nicholas. After them other couples followed, filling the whole dining hall, and last of all the children, tutors, and governesses followed singly. The footmen began moving about, chairs scraped, the band struck up in the gallery, and the guests settled down in their places. Then the strains of the Count's household band were replaced by the clatter of knives and forks, the voices of visitors, and the soft steps of the footmen. At one end of the table sat the Countess with Maria Dmitrievna on her right and Anna Mikhailovna on her left, the other lady visitors were farther down. At the other end sat the Count, with the Hussar colonel on his left and Shinshin and the other male visitors on his right. Midway down the long table on one side sat the grown-up young people, Vera beside Berg, and Pierre beside Boris, and on the other side, the children, tutors, and governesses. From behind the crystal decanters and fruit vases, the Count kept glancing at his wife and her tall cap with its light blue ribbons, and busily filled his neighbors' glasses, not neglecting his own. The Countess in turn, without omitting her duties as hostess, threw significant glances from behind the pineapples at her husband whose face and bald head seemed by their redness to contrast more than usual with his grey hair. At the ladies' end an even chatter of voices was heard all the time, at the men's end the voices sounded louder and louder, especially that of the colonel of hussars who, growing more and more flushed, ate and drank so much that the Count held him up as a pattern to the other guests. Berg with tender smiles was saying to Vera that love is not an earthly but a heavenly feeling. Boris was telling his new friend Pierre who the guests were and exchanging glances with Natasha, who was sitting opposite. Pierre spoke little but examined the new faces, and ate a great deal. Of the two soups he chose turtle with savory patties and went on to the game without omitting a single dish or one of the wines. These latter the butler thrust mysteriously forward, wrapped in a napkin, from behind the next man's shoulders and whispered, "Dry Madeira. Hungarian, or Rhine wine as the case might be." Of the 4 crystal glasses engraved with the Count's monogram that stood before his plate, Pierre held out one at random and drank with enjoyment, gazing with ever-increasing amiability at the other guests. Natasha, who sat opposite, was looking at Boris as girls of 13 look at the boy they are in love with and have just kissed for the first time. Sometimes that same look fell on Pierre, and that funny lively little girl's look made him inclined to laugh without knowing why. Nicholas sat at some distance from Sonia, beside Julie Karagina, to whom he was again talking with the same involuntary smile. Sonia wore a company smile but was evidently tormented by jealousy, now she turned pale, now blushed and strained every nerve to overhear what Nicholas and Julie were saying to one another. The governess kept looking round uneasily as if preparing to resent any slight that might be put upon the children. The German tutor was trying to remember all the dishes, wines, and kinds of dessert, in order to send a full description of the dinner to his people in Germany, and he felt greatly offended when the butler with a bottle wrapped in a napkin passed him by. He frowned, trying to appear as if he did not want any of that wine, but was mortified because no one would understand that it was not to quench his thirst or from greediness that he wanted it, but simply from a conscientious desire for knowledge.